Okay, so just when you think this thing cannot get any crazier, it just did. I have so many updates for you. We have President Biden on the ground over there in Israel. We have the hospital bombing in Gaza. Massive updates. This story is even crazier than what they've told us. And we have the latest updates from the war from the front in Israel. There's a lot to cover in this video. Let's get started with the Biden visit. Now look, I believe that the Biden visit is more ceremonial and symbolic than it is operational. I believe that all the decisions, the strategies, all the kinks were worked out during the Anthony Blinken visit for the past few days when he was over there. I believe Biden is coming over there to show kind of support and to show unity, but Blinken did all the heavy lifting. All the strategies, all the decisions are already made. Now, what are the decisions, right? What are they trying to work out? Well, you have to understand that Israel and the US, even though they have very similar interests at this point, there's a divergence. The end game for the United States and the end game for Israel are completely different. Now, while the US has a bigger plan in motion with the Gulf countries, UAE and Saudi and Israel and the US with this pact, the defense pact, the energy pact, to counter Iran and China and Russia, they do not want a regional war in the Middle East at any cost. That's going to make that plan go boo-boo. On the other hand, the Israelis are looking at this and saying, hey, President Biden, we just find out that the 2 million people living in Gaza across the border are people who are trying to murder us, literally. And they will take any chance to cross the border and murder women and children in their homes. And we cannot accept them being there and just let it go. There's no way we can live with that. There's no way we can coexist with that. We have to find a solution that will make them not be there. Whether it's taking out Hamas, whether it's demilitarizing, occupying, I don't know what the solution is, but the Israelis need a solution that will prevent this from ever happening again. And in their eyes, it's pretty much at any cost. At any cost, this cannot happen again. On the US side, it's like, well, that's true, but we cannot start a regional war. Don't do anything that's going to push Iran and Hezbollah and Lebanon and Syria and going to drag them into this war and potentially, God forbid, even Egypt and Jordan. So there is a different set of interests here. So I believe the American presence, which is unprecedented right now in Israel, which is the destroyers and the carriers and Blinken and Biden sitting on war cabinet meetings with the US government present on war cabinet meetings in Israel is absolutely unprecedented. And the speeches of Biden and speeches by Blinken, all of this massive unconditional support has a lot of conditions and a lot of strings attached. So I believe the price that will be collected for all of this massive support is a holdback of Israel from not doing anything that's going to set off a regional warfare. That's what the end game. And I don't know what is the carrot here that will be given to Israel in order for them to accept that. But the United States is not going to allow Israel to go full ham on this and cause a regional war. So that's kind of the balancing act that's going on right now. But Israel, on the other hand, won't accept money. It's not about money anymore. They need a firm solution to this. But on the more ceremonial side, Biden basically said that he supports Israel at any cost. They shook hands. They had a nice photo op, beautiful moment. And he also said that based on the evidence that was presented to him, Israel has nothing to do with the bombing of the Gaza hospital, which is kind of a nice segue to that part of our show today, which is absolutely insane. So where do we start with this? So at 8:30 p.m. local time in Gaza, Hamas notified that 500 people died from an explosion in a hospital caused by an Israeli air raid. Now that happened 8:30 p.m. local time, and basically they counted the death toll literally the moment the attack happened. So that came out seconds after the attack, minutes after the attack, they already had a death toll. Which is a little bit peculiar because the Israelis haven't still finished counting their dead from the attack on the festival and their towns, the border towns. They still have hundreds of unidentified bodies, and somehow the Palestinians have counted 500 dead right away, which is in itself was a little bit off and fishy to me as a logical person. Even though I'm not automatically doubting what they're saying, but I'm saying that's a little bit odd. And then every single media outlet out there in the world, including some which I didn't expect, like the New York Times, immediately ran with the story, literally minutes, 6 or 7 minutes into this. They all ran with the story basically saying Israeli airstrike kills 500 people by targeting a hospital in Gaza. Now, this wasn't the main hospital in Gaza, and that's important in a second, you understand why. This was another hospital, the Baptist, the Christian hospital in Gaza. The reason I'm saying this is because the main headquarters of Hamas, and it is well documented, well known, it's situated in the underground level, in the basement level of the bigger hospital in Gaza. And everybody knows it, but Israel doesn't dare to attack it because they cannot attack a hospital. So that was the first red flag for me after that 500 number, which came out instantaneously. I was like, that's odd. Why would Israel not attack the Hamas headquarters at Shifa hospital, the big one, and attack this hospital, which is the much smaller hospital, and it's not even sure that it has military presence in it or not. But every single media outlet ran with it. Riots start in every single country where there's Arabic people, massive riots in Jordan. People try to storm the Israeli embassy, same thing in Turkey, riots in Greece, all over the world. People are rioting within minutes after this thing is happening, essentially blaming Israel for what happened. Now, 2.5 hours after the bombing, the IDF released an announcement in which they said, we categorically had nothing to do with this, and this was a failed launch by a rocket from Gaza that exploded midair, and all the debris fell on the hospital and caused the fire. Now, of course, I mean, that kind of was not accepted by the Arab world. Nobody accepted that explanation, and immediately they started rejecting that explanation, saying, well, that's just the IDF denying that they screwed up. Now, what actually ended up happening based on the evidence we gathered in the past 17 hours, and this is all verified, vetted information, is that it was not the Hamas who shot that rocket. It was a different group called the Islamic Jihad, which is one of the subgroups in the Gaza Strip, which kind of are like quasi-Hamas, but a little bit smaller. So the Islamic Jihad, which is well known for having misfunctions in its missiles, about 30% of the missiles it shoots to Israel, they misfire or explode, etc., they tried to launch a long-range missile to the north of Israel for the first time for them since the beginning of the fight. Hamas already did it once. And that missile basically didn't work out, and it landed apparently in the parking lot of the hospital. Now, numerous videos surfaced from every single angle showing that happening, basically proving that this was a failed launch by the Islamic Jihad and showing the missile actually being basically dropped on top of the hospital. Now, at this point, the Gaza Strip went crazy. They held a whole press conference in the middle of a bunch of dead people, literally dead bodies, in which they mourned, etc., and everybody condemned Israel, etc., etc. Now, as videos came out in the morning, we actually got some footage from the location of the destruction, and all we saw was a parking lot outside the hospital with a bunch of burnt cars. Not a crater, not an explosion site. We've seen many explosion sites from JDAMs over the past week. No crater. Cars are intact. They're burnt up, but they're intact. And it's a parking lot. It's not a building. At this point, it was really clear it wasn't Israel. But then the IDF spokesperson actually released a conversation that was intercepted between two Hamas operatives, dry snitching on themselves, admitting that it was the Islamic Jihad screwing up and basically hitting the hospital. So what ended up happening is that we haven't seen any evidence of that 500 death toll. It's right now, there hasn't been a single piece of evidence showing that. And what we have right now is it seems that the Islamic Jihad fucked up by firing that rocket. The Hamas lied about it to the world. And the global media, for clicks and drama, because everybody wanted to get the scoop first, they ran with it without verifying the story, causing a massive riot and anti-Jewish, anti-Israel sentiment around the world. Absolutely insane. Even we had Iran yesterday coming out and saying it's over for Israel, essentially threatening the end of Israel pretty much. So, and then, in the morning we saw what happened. Failed launch, the 500 death toll seems very, like, if you look at that parking lot and you count the number of cars in that parking lot, you would need to cram 40 people into each car for that number to add up to 500. I'm just saying, it's highly implausible. Now, what actually did happen is that the UK Prime Minister, literally this morning, before I started making this video, came out and said, I condemn Hamas for what they did to the hospital in Gaza. So, except Biden, we're now starting to see condemnations from the UK Prime Minister, who was the first after Biden to come out and condemn Hamas for what they've done with the hospital. So, at this point, it's a done deal. It's clear this was not the Israelis. And it's also clear that the global media has to be very careful how they report these stories, even though they're chasing clicks, and I get it, but they got to be more careful. I mean, Jordan and Egypt both came out and said, hey, we're not taking any refugees, but it's not because we don't want them. It's because we don't want Israel to displace you and then you're going to lose your home. We're taking care of your interests. We're not hating on you. It's just we want to help you to keep your land. Now, that's a bunch of horse manure, and I'll explain why. You see, Jordan and Egypt have different problems. Jordan is mostly Palestinian, and it's being ruled by a king who's a minority king from the Hashemites. They were imported pretty much from Iraq, but it's a whole different story. That massive Palestinian population is a powder keg waiting to explode. The last thing the Jordanians want is to add another couple 100,000 of Palestinians in their territory. Their existing Palestinians are already pretty much on the brink of overthrowing this government, which is a minority. So they're not taking any of them. The Egyptian side is a different story. Now, the Egyptians have bad experience. The last time they opened up the borders for refugees from the Gaza Strip, these refugees ended up forming an armed militia and started attacking Israel from Egypt, essentially almost causing a war between Egypt and Israel, which is the last thing that the current ruler of Egypt wants. Now, Mohammed al-Sisi, who's the current ruler of Egypt, is actually a good friend of Israel. He's not an enemy. They're collaborating, they're cooperating, and is a good friend of the Israelis. They codepend each other. They both hate the Muslim Brotherhood. It's their enemy. But his people basically also hate Israel. So he cannot appear as if he's collaborating with Israel to displace the refugees. He has to play that game. So he needs to show his people. He tried to prevent this, but the Israelis and the Americans, they somehow forced them into it. So the Egyptians might actually crack. What might end up happening behind the scenes is there's going to be a price. I don't know how many billions of dollars, but he will get paid. And then the Americans will force him to open the borders, and he will reluctantly be kind of forced into opening the borders and letting these people in and house them in the Sinai Peninsula, which is not even close to the mainland of Egypt, and basically have them contained there, and will get lots of money from the United States to pay off for whatever this thing, but he has to play the game. As far as war updates on the northern side of Israel, we have the daily attacks by Hezbollah shooting rockets, and then the IDF retaliating tit for tat. No war yet, but it's basically one bad decision away from a northern front, which could be very, very dangerous. On the ground operation, it seems imminent. I don't know when it's going to start, but it seems imminent. You have to remember, Hamas has 30,000 fighters in a whole city underground, booby traps, and they will be looking for another Gaza hospital event. So if the IDF is going to be there, they're going to be looking for a massive casualty event like they almost had yesterday, so they can pull the trigger and cause a massive outrage towards Israel and pull that lever. Also, don't forget, the public in Israel is not going to be happy about the massive casualty count as far as IDF soldiers, and that's going to be inevitable in that environment. So this whole thing is about to be messy. Now, right now, as President Biden is in Israel, it's still quiet, and it will remain quiet, I think, until he leaves. But once he leaves, all bets are off. I don't know what's going to happen. Now, the Israeli government passed a decision that's allowing the local municipalities to evacuate from the northern border towns that are in the vicinity of 5 kilometers from the border. And the decision was made, but still not carried out. So that's kind of imminent. Now, I do want to explain something. The reason you're not hearing the Palestinian Authority in this whole story, except condemning Israel and paying the lip service yesterday, is that the Palestinian Authority, which holds Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, they hate the Hamas. And they're literally sitting there waiting for Israel to kill the Hamas. Because once Israel kills the Hamas, what ends up happening most likely is the Palestinian Authority gets to go back and take over Gaza again. Last time they did it, Hamas kicked them out. This time they're going to get a do-over. And essentially, even though they're corrupt, impotent, and pretty much hated by the Palestinian people, it seems like they're going to get a 2.0 try at the Palestinian state or some sort of a quasi-autonomy. I don't know what's going to happen, but right now they're basically sitting there hoping that Benjamin Netanyahu finishes off the Hamas, even though they might say different. Now, it doesn't mean there's not really any skirmishes and some issues with lone terrorists perhaps, but on the institutional side, the Palestinian Authority, the Egyptians, the US, France, UK, Italy, and Germany are all sitting there saying, please, please finish the Hamas, but don't start the global war or regional war. That's a very delicate dance for the Israelis to pull off. Hopefully they get it done. As always, thank you so much. I just want to remind everybody who's been asking me about donations, I do not have a Patreon for this channel. If you want to donate to this channel, don't. Instead, go and donate to a good cause on my behalf and let me know where you put the money. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next video.